Thank you very much for the warm reception. And I know that you have been seated a while, and there were wrinkles in your shorts and skirts. And it was a nice chance to get up and smooth them out, I guess. You know, thus far, this has been, seems to me, like more like a eulogy to me. And I'm not quite gone yet. I may be well along the way, but I have a little time left. At least I hope so. We heard a lot of definitions for success, ideas. I enjoyed them, and it can be defined in many different ways. Andy over there a little while ago was discussing some ideas on success, and Swen, not only does he discuss ideas of success, he wrote something on success that he just gave me. May I give this, Swen? He just wrote this. Success. Some say success is fortune and fame, or winning a crown in a championship game. Some say success is in riches and gold, or trophies and medals. That's what we've been told. We worship the winners who shine in the race, and shame all the trailers who hold second place. We train our poor children to be only the best. Success is just when you're ahead of the rest. We tell them success is an A or a B, and that something is wrong if they bring home a C. What's wrong with the teacher? Why can't my child pass? My child's name should be at the top of the class. Now, if you have children of school age, you'll agree with that, I'm sure. My taxes are spent and remain in their pay, so why is my genius not getting an A? My child is not average. They say as they're riled, that place is reserved for the neighbor's child. But God in his wisdom, when making this race, did not make us equal in talent and grace. For some of us run, but then others are lame. But both share success if they try just the same. If you came up short when you went for the A, but gave it your all to the very last day, an effort was made to be all that you can be, you're still a success if you bring home a C. When you know that you gave it all, then you'll find that self-satisfaction gives sweet peace of mind. And that peace of mind that you only possess is your declaration that you're a success. I like that, Swen. I believe a great deal of it emanated from something that I worked on for quite a while to come up with. When I started my teaching profession after graduating from Purdue University in 1932, I found myself a little bit disappointed, somewhat disillusioned. I shouldn't say completely surprised at what parents seem to think that their youngsters in my English classes should receive. And if they didn't receive an A or a B, I found that many parents just felt that either the youngster or the teacher had failed. I didn't like that way of measuring. I didn't think it was fair. The good Lord in his infinite wisdom didn't create us equal as far as intelligence is concerned any more than we equal for size, appearance. We are not born in the same environments. We do not all have the same opportunities. And I didn't like that way of measuring. Now, even in the 1930s, alumni, I think, are much like you are today, and you judge the athletic teams of your alma mater by the winning percentage. And I know if they win them all, you consider them to be reasonably successful. I know that to be true because we did have a number of years where we won them all, but it seemed we didn't win each and every game, but the margin that some of our alumni had predicted. And I occasionally had the feeling that they had not only predicted it, but they had backed up their predictions in a more materialistic sort of way. But that was true in the 30s. It's true in the 30s. I don't think it's a fair way. And I didn't like that. And we all want success, and we should. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's try to consider what true success is. I think there's a misconception in many ways. Well, I thought about this, and I wanted to become a better teacher. I wanted to give the youngsters under my supervision something to which to aspire. other than just a higher mark in the classroom or perhaps more points in some athletic endeavor. I didn't know how to go about it, but I thought a lot about it. And many things came to mind. First of all, my father. My father, when I was young in grade school, he tried to teach me and my brothers that you should never try to be better than someone else. You should always be learning from others, and you should never cease trying to be the best you could be. That's in your power. The other isn't. And if you get too concerned and engrossed in the things over which you have no control, it will adversely affect the things over which you have control. And I'm sure when Dad tried to get that across, he didn't do a very good job, because I think for the most part it went in, but that's about it. It didn't retain. But somewhere in the hidden recesses of the mind, I guess it did, because years later I thought about that. Then I also recalled a professor I'd had that had the class give their definitions of success, and it was very interesting, and I would say that most of them are quite different from those that I heard this morning, because most of them at that particular time at our age, there was something about material possessions or power or prestige of something along that line. And I didn't like that, but I remembered that. And then I ran across a verse, a simple verse. I love poetry, as has been indicated. And I think it makes an impression, making a point. And one simple verse said, "At God's footstool to confess, a poor soul knelt and bowed his head. I failed," he cried. "The master said, thou didst thy best. That is success." I like that. And from those three things, I coined my own definition of success. Peace of mind, attained only through self-satisfaction in knowing we made the effort, and I believe that's left out on the board, we made the effort to become the best of which we're capable. We're all equal in that respect. We may not have the same facilities with which to work. We may not be in the same environment in which to work, but we're all equal as having the opportunity to make the most of what we have under the conditions that exist, and the opportunity to try to improve those conditions instead of getting back to one of Dad's sets of threes. Don't whine, don't complain, don't make excuses. Just do the best you can. So that was the origin of this. And I wanted it to make me a better teacher. And as they say, give the youngsters under my supervision something in which to aspire. And it didn't seem to be working. And I couldn't figure out why. And I tried to analyze it. And, self-analysis is sometimes more difficult than trying to analyze others. But I finally came to the conclusion that it was just a definition. It was something rather abject. And I felt that if I could come up with something you could see, it might become a little more meaningful and make a little better impression upon those that might be subjected to it. And about this time, here again, something popped out from the hidden recess of the mind that I'd heard many years ago called a ladder of achievement. Someone had taken a ladder with 5 rungs in the ladder and had named each rung of the ladder some particular trait or characteristic that this particular individual felt was necessary to get to the top of the ladder, where we'd all like to get. We might differ on what we consider the top of the ladder to be, but we'd all like to get there, and I don't see anything wrong with it being ambitious, but I think there's something wrong for ambitious people that don't do anything about it. Just expect it to happen without putting in the effort to do so. So from this, I can't use a ladder, of course, he beat me to it. I'm sure I would have thought of it if he hadn't. But somebody beat, he or she, I don't know who it was. But that gave me an idea of the pyramid. And I thought about this sometime, worked on it for many years. But for some strange reason, the very first blocks that I chose for this were the cornerstones. And you'd all agree, I'm sure, with me that if any structures have any strength and stability, it must have a strong foundation. And of course, the cornerstones anchor the foundation. And why I happen to just choose those and never change them, I don't know. Because many of the other blocks within the structure changed positions. Some of them, and a lot of them are new. I discarded different ideas and kept these in because I could use many things by different name that might mean perhaps the same thing within the structure. But the cornerstones, always. I never had an idea about changing them. One, of course, is industriousness, and the other is enthusiasm. Industriousness. There is no shortcut. If you're looking for the trick, if you're looking for the easy way, you might get by. That's true for a while, but in so doing, you will not be developing the talents that lie within you. Industriousness. Grantland Rice, I believe, has been spoken of, and I know there's a poem or two in the manual about him, but when I think of industrious, I think of something that I read way back in the 30s that he wrote, How to Be a Champion, and he said, in part now, you wonder how they do it, you look to see the knack, you watch the foot in action, or the shoulder, or the back, but when you spot the answer where the higher glamours lurk, you'll find in moving higher up the laurel-covered spire that the most of it is practice and the rest of it is work. I certainly believe that is true. There is no substitute for that. The other cornerstone is enthusiasm. Do you people all enjoy what you're doing? I hope so. If you're not doing nearly what you're capable of doing. I think we have to be enthusiastic about what we're doing. And you know, enthusiasm brushes off on those with whom you come in contact. A leader, any person in a leadership position, must stimulate those under his or her supervision. And if you're not enthusiastic of yourself, you can't expect those under your supervision to be so. When I think of supervision, I often think of think of enthusiasm. I often think of my first year at UCLA. I attended a meeting one evening to hear a gentleman speak on a topic on which I had no interest at all. And he said, why'd you go? Well, maybe for some reason that some of you are here. Somebody told you to go. I don't know. Maybe somebody paid for it. Maybe somebody else. I don't know. But anyway, someone under whose supervision I was suggested I be there. And I'd already had a peek at the basketball players with whom I was going to be working. And I thought it very wise for me to ingratiate myself in every other possible way because I didn't think those players were going to do it. And so I was there. I sat close to the front. I wanted them to know I was there. I just hoped the fellow wouldn't talk very long. But you know, before long, he was enthusiastic, and it brushed off. And I was sorry when he brought his remarks to a close. He wasn't loud, he wasn't bombastic, but you could tell by his countenance, the twinkle of his eye, he loved his topic, and he knew his topic. That also helps, too, if you know what you're talking about. And he certainly did. And I was sorry when he brought his remarks to a close. A few days later, I had been over at the administration building at UCLA, and most of you are too young to know anything about the administration building then. There was nothing like it is now. Of course, UCLA was nothing like it is now. I think we had 7 or 8 buildings. Now, I don't know. I can't even get around myself. I'm lost on the place. But anyway, I'd been over at the administration building for some reason or other, and upon my return, I came by Powell Library, our main library, and with no initial intention whatsoever to do so, I found myself in the library, browsing around the stacks, seeking some additional information in regard to a topic about which only a few days before I'd had absolutely no interest at all. Enthusiasm stimulates others. Enthusiasm. You must have it if you're going to come close to reaching your own particular level of competency. Not being better than someone else, but coming close to making the most of what you have. Can't do it because that's perfection, and we're all imperfect, but we're all equals having the opportunity to make the effort to do that. Between the 2 cornerstones forming the foundation, I wanted strong blocks, and I finally elected blocks that I thought included others: friendship, loyalty, and cooperation. Friendship, work at it. Too often we take friendship for granted. You have to work at friendship. You have to work at making friends. You have to work at making friendship flourish. It's two-sided. It isn't friendship when someone's doing something nice for you. That's a nice person. It's friendship when you do for each other. Friendship is like marriage, two-sided. Both sides have to work at it. You just can't take things for granted. You have to work at it. And it pays enormous dividends, whether it be in friendship or just in marriage. Or I shouldn't say just in marriage, or in marriage. And then we have loyalty as a center block. Loyalty, I think we all need someone to whom we must be loyal if we're going to have the peace within us that we need to function near our ability level. And we need something to which we must be loyal. It may be the workplace. We need someone and something to whom and to which we must be loyal if we're ever going to come close to functioning near our own particular level of competency. And then the third block is cooperation. Cooperation. Working together. It's so important. I think modern science and technology has made the world so small today that cooperation is even more essential throughout the world. It's always been essential. But the way things are today, seeing things as they're happening on the other side of the world, and the miraculous things they're doing in outer space and all the other things, some of you hardly can't drive on the freeways here without having a phone up in your ear or something, and it's a wonder they're not more wrecks than they are. But anyway, we need cooperation. I think it is so important. And that forms the foundation of the structure. The second tier, I placed 4 blocks: self-control, alertness, initiative, and intentness. You must have self-control in whatever you're doing. As a teacher of basketball, I tried to maintain self-control on the sidelines. If I'm trying to teach my players that if they lose their self-control, they're going to be outplayed, don't they have a right to say to me, Coach, if you lose your temper, you're going to be outcoached on the sideline? I think they have every effort to. Sometimes you have to work at keeping self-control, but you must maintain it to do well at whatever you're doing. I suspect we have golfers here. It does take a lot of time, and it's expensive, and you probably shouldn't. But I know we do have golfers here. And if you lose your self-control, I know that the ball will be a little farther to the right or the left, or you're off the tee, or that 3-foot putt will seem about 10 feet if you lose your self-control. You have to keep your emotions under control to function well, physically, in whatever you're doing. But how about mentally? Decisions you have to make. How many of you have children at home, little children? They cry out for discipline, you know, not punishment, discipline. They want discipline. They want discipline. And discipline is to help. It's to prevent. It's to correct. It's to improve. It's not to punish. Be careful. Be careful. Don't antagonize. If you antagonize in your discipline, it might not bring the type of results that you'd like for it to have. But I think we all, even as we get older, we need discipline in certain areas, maybe in different areas than others. But it must be done with self-control. If you lose your self-control, I don't see there's any way that you can attain positive, productive results. So it's so important that you maintain self-control in the physical things you do and the mental decisions that you must make. Then the next block I have is alertness. There's something going on around about us almost all the time from which we can learn. But too often we get lost in our own narrow tunnel vision, in our egos, which we all have and should have. We just must keep it under control. But we will get lost that way. I think of my favorite American, Abraham Lincoln, when I think of alertness. And he once said, he never met a person from whom he did not learn something. And he had a great sense of humor, too. And he said, of course, most of the time it was something not to do. Well, that's learning just the same. That's learning just the same. So we must be alert and alive, because we never know whether there's going to be something there that can help us become a better person. And then the next block is initiative. Goodness sakes, don't be afraid to fail. None of you are perfect or perfect. Oh, we're all imperfect. You're going to fail on occasions. But the greatest failure of all is failure to act when action is needed. You have to act with self-control. You have to use the information that you've acquired in the past in regard to the situation that requires action. But you have to act knowing that at times you will fail. But don't be afraid to fail. That's the greatest, absolutely the greatest fault of all, is the failure to act when action is needed. The next block, I chose to use the word intentness. I might well have used determination. I might well have used perseverance. I might well have used persistence, but I just happened to use the word intentness. Tried to look it up in the dictionary one time, couldn't find it, but nevertheless I used it. And it's being determined on reaching a realistic objective. I believe in goals, but I believe you have to use good judgment in making a goal. If you make the goal too difficult to attain or achieve, that will become apparent, and it will be counterproductive. If you make the goal too easily achieved, it won't be very lasting, probably, and not worthwhile. So goals should be made difficult, but within the realm of possibility. Good things should take time, should take hard work, and goals should acquire that. Don't give up. At times you're going to come against obstacles. You're going to come against adversity. But someone said, when I look back, it seems to me all the grief that had to be left me when the pain was o'er, stronger than I was before. I believe that's true. How do we get stronger physically? Weights, adversity. How do we get stronger mentally? Increasingly difficult subject matter. Math, for example. We don't start with calculus. We start with arithmetic and get into algebra and geometry and so on. Increasingly difficult. We get better. I think we get better morally by being tested, and spiritually I think we get better when we're tested. And we shouldn't fear those things. They're only going to make us stronger, better people. If we'll just sort of take them in stride and not just expect all the good things and the easy things to come our way. That's not life, and that's not the way life should be. So that takes care of the first two tiers. Now we get to the third one, which I call the heart of the structure. And those are condition, skill, and team spirit. You must be conditioned for whatever you're doing. And I dare say some of you think when I speak of that I'm thinking only of physical condition, and I certainly am thinking of physical condition. But you cannot attain and maintain desirable physical condition unless it's preceded by mental and moral conditioning. So they're all important. And there's different types of conditioning. Whatever your profession is, you have to be conditioned for it. Even in the same profession, let's say a football player, if that can be considered a profession, from what I've read, what some of those players are being paid, I guess it'll have to be considered a profession. But let's take football. A linebacker certainly is not conditioned the same way as a wide receiver is. There's different type of conditioning. And the coach, the teacher, he better be conditioned in a certain way too. But so there's different types of conditioning, and whatever it is, you must have physical condition, and it can be attained and maintained by just practice of moderation. It's no great sacrifice to practice moderation and do the things that will be more conducive to your physical condition, but you have to be mentally and morally strong to make that come about. And then the next block, the skills, the very center, the heart of the structure, the skills. You have to know what you're doing. And that's not enough. You have to be able to do it. And that's not enough. You better be able to do it quickly. If you can't do it quickly, you might not get to do it at all. I recall some basketball players that I had at UCLA were great shooters. Oh, goodness, I had some that could really shoot. But I'm not talking about you, Andy. And some of them, they weren't quick enough to get shots away. But boy, they could shoot. You didn't hear them, you didn't know about them because they didn't play very much, but they could shoot. But I had some others that could get all sorts of shots. Ooh, were they quick? But they couldn't shoot. And that didn't help us either. So you have to be able to do things not only proper, but quickly. As Andy will tell you, be quick, but don't hurry, If you start hurrying, that's not too good. But you better be quick or you might not do it at all. And then the last block is team spirit. Team spirit really is just consideration for others. And we need that in every walk of our life, consideration for others. I once heard team spirit defined as a willingness to lose oneself in the group for the good of the group. And I used that for some years, but it never quite satisfied me. And it wasn't quite what I was looking for. I didn't know why, but I finally came up with something that improved it as far as my feeling was concerned. I changed the word willingness to eagerness. If you're eager to do something, you'll want to do it, and you'll try. You'll work your best. If you're willing to do something, well, somebody asked me to, and I'll do it. I really don't want to, but I will. And I don't think you can force yourself to execute near your level of competency unless you're eager to do something. You must be eager to do something. But consideration for others. I firmly believe that in this troubled world of ours today, if heads of state truly had more consideration for others, our problems would not be as severe. We'd have problems, and we're always going to have problems. But if we'll be considerate and listen to others, the problems will not be unmanageable. They may be difficult, but they wouldn't be unmanageable if we'll just look at the other person and have consideration. You know, in the history of our civilization, there have been many wars fought, millions of lives lost because heads of state, those in position to make these judgments that cause wars, were not considerate of others. And that's a shame. That's a shame. You know, in some way, you and I are guilty unless each and every day in our lives we do not try to do something to alleviate unjust prejudices, because there's so many unjust prejudices. And most of us, we just accept them and don't do much about it. You may say, well, I can't do much as an individual, and you'd be absolutely right. But together, much can be accomplished. We are many, but are we much? Not until we work together for the common goal. I spoke of war a moment ago, and I'd like to, if you don't mind, bring up something personal that happened to me. During the Vietnam situation of a number of years ago, I didn't understand that then nor now. Any of you, could you understand it? You'd explain that whole thing to me? No one ever has yet. But I found this was a sort of an anti-establishment era, and a lot of young men in our country were running off to Canada or the Scandinavian countries or elsewhere to avoid the draft. And was I critical of those that were running away. I didn't want my grandsons to run away. If they were, I hoped they wouldn't be drafted, but if they were, I wanted them to go. But I was so critical of those that were running away. I mean, you know, criticism is like envy. It's like jealousy. It can become cancerous within you, and you might not even realize it. You know, jealousy doesn't harm the person of whom you're jealous. It harms you. That were running away. I didn't want my grandsons to run away. If they were, I hoped they wouldn't be drafted, but if they were, I wanted them to go. But I was so critical of those that were running away. I mean, you know, criticism is like envy. It's like jealousy. It can become cancerous within you, and you might not even realize it. You know, jealousy doesn't harm the person of whom you're jealous. It harms you. And I think criticism and envy can do the same thing. It can become cancerous within you. And this was happening to me without my realization, I believe. But I had occasion to go across the country. And in coming back from the east on the plane, I picked up a magazine that I hadn't, I'd seen the magazine, but this article I hadn't seen before. And it was written by a man who was in World War I. And he saw the horrors of war at the very front. He was in the infantry, and he saw the horrors of war. And after one terrible battle, when between the Allies and the Germans, they were shelling each other back and forth, and then there'd be a lull, probably bringing up more ammunition, I presume. But during this lull, he sat down and wrote some lines that he chose to call Two Sides of War. All wars are planned by older men in council rooms apart. They call for greater armament and map the battle chart. But out upon the shattered fields where golden hopes are gray, how very young the faces are where all the dead men lay. Portly and solemn in their pride, the elders cast their vote for this or that or something else that sounds the warlike note. But where their sightless eyes stare out and gone are all their joys, I've noticed nearly all the dead were hardly more than boys. Average age of fatalities in the teens. Considerably older people sending to their deaths, perhaps necessary. All I know is I'm glad it made that trip. I'm glad I picked up that magazine. It helped me, I hope, get rid of at least some, and I'd like to think most of this criticism that I had of others. I do believe that there was just more consideration for others, the world would be a much, much better place, and it has to start at the top. It doesn't, well, just, we need more of it. Well, I get carried away there a little bit, sorry. Just above those, I have two blocks. One is poise and one is confidence. Confidence you must have to execute well, and you can't have it unless you're prepared in whatever you're doing. Failure to prepare is preparing to fail, so you have to have that. You can't expect others to have confidence in you if you don't have confidence in yourself. And you must have poise. I like to make up definitions. Poise to me is very simple. It's just being yourself. Be what you are. A person with poise is not acting. They're not pretending. They're not trying to be something they're not. They are themselves. Therefore, whatever they're doing, they're going to execute near their own particular level of competency. And those are essential traits. We need those so much. Confidence and poise. I've been asked, can you really get poise and confidence is real? That's not whistling in the dark. Not being false. Can you do that? And I said, I think so. I think it's possible. And they said, well, how? And I said, well, it's difficult, of course, but they're good qualities. And good qualities should be difficult to attain. And they said, well, how do you do it? And I said, well, let's say if you're industrious, if you're enthusiastic, if you're friendly, if you're loyal, if you're cooperative, and if you maintain self-control, and if you're alert and alive and observing constantly, and if you have initiative and aren't afraid to fail, knowing quite well that you're imperfect and you are going to fail at times, and if you're intent on reaching realistic objectives and attaining poise and confidence, and if you conditioned yourself for doing these things, and if you work at it and are skilled and can execute not only properly but quickly, and if you're imbued with consideration for others, you'll have poise and confidence, and it'll be true. It will not be false. It will not be whistling in the dark at all. And these things, all these things will lead up to the top block and make you competitive. They'll make you enjoy it when it's difficult. There's more pleasure in being involved in something that's difficult than there is in being involved in something that anybody else could do. Most of our daily tasks that you and I have and we do, anybody else could do, most of them. They're easy, but there's no joy in those. But there is joy in being involved in something that is more difficult. There are alumni at UCLA Hall. I was there. Of course, they've changed. I'm sure they've changed. But they felt that there was joy in beating some team by 50 points. There was no joy in that. Not much, that is. There's real joy in playing against someone about your own level of competency. That's the joy. There's the joy in the competition. That brings real joy. Now, those are the blocks that make up the pyramid that I have, but on the side, I have other little ideas that sort of serve like mortar, holding the blocks in position. I'm not going to talk about those. I'm just going to talk about the top two, leading up from competitive greatness to the top success. According to my definition, up at the apex, on one side I have patience, and on the other side I have faith. You need those two things. You must understand that good things take time. You must be patient. Now, I suspect that many of us are impatient with our youth. Youth, they want to change lots of things. They think that maybe that all change is progress. And as we get older, though, we sometimes we're stuck with the status quo, and we forget that there is no progress without change. Youth thinks that all change is progress, but it isn't. But as we get older, we got to realize that there is no progress without change. But we must have patience. Good things take time, and that's the way it should be. And we must have faith that these things are going to work out. The way we want them to? No, not necessarily. Work out the way they should work out, providing that we do what we should to make it become reality. Too often we just want things to work out the way we want them to, but we don't want to pay the price, so to speak, of doing the things that would help that become reality. So those are the things that I thought about in working up this pyramid, all based originally on my own definition of success. There was a Major League Baseball umpire by the name of George Moriarty. I don't know if any of you heard of him or not. He was a well-known umpire back long ago. I guess you wouldn't have known anything about it. But he spelled Moriarty with only one I, and I never saw it spelled that way. But he did with only one I, which was a terrible mistake, because Major League Baseball umpires, they notice things like that. And he was often accused of the fact that even though there was only one I in his name, that was one more than he had in his head. But he wrote something that I think brings out what I tried to do in the development of this pyramid. He called it the road ahead or the road behind. And he said, sometimes I think the fates must grin as we denounce them and insist the only reason we can't win is because the fates themselves have missed. Yet there lives on the ancient claim, we win or lose within ourselves. The shining trophies on our shelves can never win tomorrow's game. You and I know deeper down, there's always a chance to win the crown. But when we fail to give our best, we simply haven't met the test of giving all and saving none until the game is really won, of showing what is meant by grit, of fighting on when others quit, of playing through, not letting up. It's bearing down that wins the cup. Of dreaming there's a goal ahead, of hoping when our dreams are dead, of praying when our hopes have fled, yet losing, not afraid to fall, if gamely we have given all. For who can ask more of a man than giving all within his span? Giving all, it seems to me, is not so far from victory. And so the fates are seldom wrong. No matter how they twist and wind, it's you and I who make our fates. We open up or close the gates on the road ahead or the road behind. And I think that is definitely true. It's within ourselves. There's so much truth when Dad said, don't whine, don't complain, don't make excuses. Just do the best of which you're capable. Make the effort to do the best of which you're capable. Never can do it 100%, but you can always make the effort. So I think with those remarks, I'll conclude about my pyramid, and I think, I didn't watch the timing here very close. Well, we're not too far out. We'll take time for questions, any kind of questions. I always kind of enjoy questions and It gives me a chance to banter a little bit with you.
Yes, Coach, how come you didn't play Swen Nader more instead of that guy named Bill Walton or whatever his name was?
That's a very good question.
Here comes the answer.
At that particular time, not that I got a lot smarter, but I wasn't smart at all at that particular time, and somehow, in my opinion, Bill Walton was just a much better player than Swen Nader. Now, I know that most of you know that he wasn't, but in my opinion, he was, and I've made so many mistakes, and I'm sure certainly in your opinion, even though it's the only person in the world that would think that, you were better than he was.
Well, my mother thought the same thing, but...
Oh, your mother? I expect you're right there.
All right, but I have a real question. When you're talking about putting a team together, and I know you recruited players a little differently than most, looking for maybe some other qualities as a priority that some would consider secondary. Could you please talk about that, and also placing these players in positions within an offense and defense so that the team would become better, even though some of those players may have less physical talent than others?
I look, first of all, and maybe I was a little different than a lot, but I think we all wanted the same thing. As a teacher, I wanted quickness. I think quickness is the most valuable asset in any sport. I've taught a number of sports before I came to UCLA, and whatever they were, I thought quickness, but the quickness must be under control. You have activity without achievement if the quickness isn't under control, so it must be under control. And then I look at, next to that, of course now at UCLA, first of all, I looked at their transcript, can they get in? And we couldn't get in a lot of youngsters that they're getting today, but anyway, I'm looking at that. Can they get in, or do they have a chance to get in? And then that would be first. Then the quickness of the player, and then do I think they can be molded into a team player? Oftentimes, high school and even college, and I think even the pros, certain players are pampered so much that they just become individual, and they're not team players. Of course, we all have egos, and we think, oh, if we had them, we could change that, and sometimes I did that, and sometimes I was right. But I wanted team players. I wanted those that were considered, I studied the transcripts of all players. I want more than just their grades. I wanted something about their family background, and give me some idea, something about them. So we did that. I didn't care too much about seeing them. I tried to get 5 different coaches who had teams that played against this particular individual in whom we might be interested, and I had a list of things that I'd send to them. I'd call them first and see if they'd do it, if they'd fill it out, and then I'd give great things from 1 to 10 about many of the fundamentals of the game and attitude and competitiveness and all that, and then I'd get those, and the own coach, if he would do it, and most of them would, and I'd take all those and I'd make one composite of all those. And from that composite, it would be a pretty good determining factor of whether I would actively pursue this individual. Now, players have to work into the team element. And there's where I had one of my biggest problems. We had lots of players that were good players that weren't going to get to play very much because I generally used 7 players. I wanted an extra backcourt man and an extra frontcourt man that are going to do most of the playing until the game is really decided, won or lost. Now, you'd have specialists here and there you might put in for a minute or two, but generally speaking, the 7 are going to carry the load. Now, one of the most difficult situations that you'd have with which to cope would be to get the other players to recognize this fact, and because they're going to be largely responsible for the development of this 7, and that's hard when they're not going to get to play very much, but they are needed. Everyone, we all want to be needed, wanted, and that trying to get them to do that. I think myself, and it might be a good example that you might understand. How many watch the Lakers? Most of you? Well, Shaquille and Kobe, what's practically all of the who do they talk about practically all the time? They got 12 guys there. Kobe and Shaq, Kobe and Shaq, Kobe and Shaq. And when Phil Jackson, the coach, was at Chicago, who'd you hear about? Who'd you hear about in Chicago? Jordan and Pippen, mostly. George and Pippen. But you've got to get all the other players to accept the fact that these certain players, you have to have them. They don't have to have you so much as you have to have them. You can do pretty well. They can get others to replace you pretty well, but it's going to be pretty hard to replace those two and to get them to realize that. So that was difficult. I'll use a specific example somewhat, and you might have been thinking about this a little bit, Swen, I don't know. How many of here remember, and this has been so many years ago, most of you are much younger, you might, Sidney Wicks, does that name ring a bell with any of you? Sidney Wicks was as physically talented to play a forward position as any player I ever had. But when he came in, he was an individual player. He was not a team player. He didn't think that. He thought he should be in there. And he'd tell me, you know I'm better than Shaq. You know I'm better than Roe. How come I'm not in there? And I said, well, I know that, Sidney. And I think they know it. And I think probably the rest of the players on the team know it. And it's just a shame that you're letting them beat you out. Because you are better. You're so much better. Oh, he'd say. And I'm saying, but until you get the team playing the team game, they're going to be playing ahead of you. And if it isn't them, it'll be somebody else. Somebody will be playing ahead of you. He had trouble understanding that. I'm not sure he ever did, but all I know is, in my opinion, the next 2 years, that was his sophomore year. Freshmen weren't eligible for competition as they are now. In the next 2 years, I think Sidney Wicks was the best college forward in the country. And in my opinion, he wouldn't have been, as far as the team is concerned, if I'd have played him more. And I don't think the team would have done as well. He obviously thinks so, but we were very fortunate that the team, I had some pretty good players, and the team did all right with him not. So he couldn't really complain too much. And sometimes they do anyway. But it's getting a combination that works together. You have to work together. There's different roles to be filled. Every role is important. Al Cindar, Jabbar, take an automobile. He's the powerful engine. He's a powerful engine. And here's somebody that maybe is just a wheel. Just a wheel. And then we have to have somebody to be a nut. Andy, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you. It takes a nut to hold that wheel on. But now when you analyze it a little, how good is that powerful engine going to be if you lose a wheel? And you're going to lose that wheel if you lose the nut. So all are important. And I think, and I've learned something in the last year or so working with Andy Hill on his book, Be Quick But Don't Hurry. I think I failed in some areas that I didn't think I failed. I thought I was doing a pretty good job in certain areas, but I found out that I didn't. And I wish I could start over. It's pretty hard to turn back the clock. So, but you're always learning, always learning. But it's getting a group to work together for the common goal. And I think the most successful teachers, it doesn't have to be in sports, in anything. If you get everybody working toward the common goal, if everyone aren't concerned about who's going to get the credit, a lot can be accomplished. If you have individuals, whether I'm going to get the credit or not, then that takes away from somebody else. Does that answer your question, Swen? Okay. It's very short and precise.
Coach, when you look at the game of basketball today, who are the teachers that you feel are doing the best job for preparing their players, not just for life in the NBA, but more importantly, building their characters for the life outside of the game? Well,
I want to definitely stay away from UCLA for obvious reasons. I don't want to just forget them. I think in our conference, is shown over a period of years that Lute Olson from Arizona does a real good job of that. And knowing what most of his players have done after they've graduated from school, and I'm not talking about just professional basketball, because that's not what they're in school for. Some of them think they are, but it's not what they should be. And I think he does an outstanding job. And there's no question in my mind that Mike Montgomery up at Stanford's a great university, and I like to see these great universities that are truly academic universities, and I think UCLA is too, incidentally. But I want to leave them out of it. I think Mike Montgomery at Stanford is one that I had one of my ex-players ask me not too long ago if I had a son that was being actively recruited to play basketball a lot of different places, what would I be thinking of? What schools would I think of? And I said, well, Stanford certainly would be one of them, and I think Duke certainly would be one of them, and I think Princeton would be one of them, and a lot. But there's a lot of others. I just mentioned some, but there are a lot of others. But I'd want him to be interested in where he certainly is going to get a good education. But there's some places where I think a good education, but I don't think the leadership there and the program there would be what I'd prefer him to be under. But I'll find another one. So, but. That's just some, but there are many others. You know, some of the best places are not these high profile. It might be there's smaller colleges right here in California that I'd be very happy to have a son of mine go to, or grandson, or great grandson now. You know, I have 10 great grandchildren. A couple months we're going to have 11. So they're working on it.
Coach, thank you for doing this seminar. It's much appreciated. My question has to do with leadership or coaching under pressure, and I'm interested in what you did during timeouts at critical moments.
I wanted to stay away from highs and lows. I've always been against peaks and valleys. I think for every peak there's going to be a valley. So at a timeout and halftime, and I think the two young men over here that played for me will tell you this, that we wanted it to be businesslike. I didn't want it to be highly emotional. I wanted to try to go over the things that would be helpful. Let's speak of my last number of years, the years when I had many years I had no full-time assistants. But when I had two full-time assistants like Gary Cunningham, who's now the director of athletics at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Denny Crum, they both had things that I wanted them to definitely speak about. In timeout, for example, Denny, I want you to talk on our press. And you have just a few seconds, you know, it's not too long. Timeouts aren't too long. And Gary, I want you to talk about our set offense. I'm going to talk about our set defense and our fast break. And concise, and then we'll try to bring them all together. I may say something about affirming something that Denny had said or Gary had said, and use them. And I tried to do that to halftime. I didn't want our players rushing out like I see teams. I'm afraid somebody's going to fall, get hurt. I want them to go out quietly. I want them to go out and get warmed up. And we try to keep it as businesslike as possible. I tried the best of my ability to stay away from any emotional. I didn't want my players to show excessive exuberation because they outscored somebody in a game. And I didn't want excessive dejection if we're outscored. You may be dejected. You're going to feel better if you outscore them. Of course, I expect that. But let's not be excessive about it. And you can be dejected when you know that you stayed out too late last night and you weren't able to execute near your level of competency. Or if you did something of that sort, you've done something of which you're kind of a little ashamed of, yeah, you have a right to be ejected. But I hope that will never happen. I want you to... My idea, I like Cervantes, who said the journey is better than the end. To me, it was the journey, the practice I always loved. The games I didn't always love that much. Oh, I guess I did, but not to the extent I loved the practices. And the competition of the games and in getting the tournaments, that didn't have as much personal satisfaction to me as except to watch. There was a test of what I was doing in practice, and I liked it that way. And I tried to keep it unemotional. Now sometimes that's difficult when you have some very emotional youngsters out there, and some of them are going to be considerably more emotional out there than others. Yes, sir.
Coach Wooden, during the 88-game win streak, your teams never had a bad night in which they lost. Despite you had talented players, were conditioned, great offense, great defense. But how did you maintain that level of excellence day in and day out with not ever having a bad night?
In one way or another, that's not quite true. Sometimes we didn't play so well, but maybe the other team didn't play so well either at that particular time. But I tried, and everything was yesterday is gone. That'll never change. Tomorrow is yet to be. How can you affect tomorrow? By today. That's the only possible way. I tried to use that, and I believe I can say this with complete honesty. I tried to get each player to make each day his masterpiece. And I on some occasions, to certain individuals, I would talk about, you just got to put the past out. Good or bad, it's got past. It'll never change. And the only way you can affect the future is what you do today. Vivian Larimore said, I've shut the door on yesterday, its sorrows and mistakes. I've locked within its gloomy walls past failures and heartaches. And now I throw the key away to seek another room and furnish it with hopes and smiles and every springtime bloom. No thought shall enter this abode that has a hint of pain, and men, envy, malice, and distrust will never entrance gain. I've shut the door on yesterday and thrown the key away. Tomorrow holds no fears for me, for I have found today. I think there's a lot to that. Today is the day that counts. It's today. Don't put it off. Today. You can't, I believe, I was brought up somewhat, I believe, maybe by Lynn, that I said, well, I'll work twice as hard tomorrow. If you're capable of working twice as hard tomorrow, what's wrong with today? Why can't you work twice as hard today? I wouldn't buy that excuse at all. And wish I could follow it 100%. I've got so much mail piled up on my desk. Well, I'll do that tomorrow. And I didn't want those under my supervision to look at it that way.
Coach, we had a lot of questions after the last seminar from some of the people. One of their concerns was balancing a busy career and work demands with home and family. And I'd like you, my opinion is that the way you organized your daily routine, which was achievement, not activity, and the way you started the day early in the day, not just getting there at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Could you describe your daily routine when you were actively coaching at UCLA, started with when you got up and when you got to school and what you did?
Well, it would change, at a certain time of the season. When the basketball season was over, certainly my latter years at UCLA, and to some extent earlier too, but more so, I was more consistent in my latter years in certain things that for many years before I retired, I was doing a 5-mile walk every morning. And I walked a brisk clip, walked in an hour, and I did that for years on the track at UCLA, which is tartan, and you can walk in this. It's nice. You're springy. Now, when I started doing that on the sidewalks and out and going up and down curbs, it's really not so good. It took me a little longer. And but I would be up to do that, and I wanted to be on the track every morning by 6:30. So I'd be up early enough to get ready to school and get there. And then after that, I would go in the coop and have some breakfast and do a little visiting with some friends and then be back to the office and try to check a few things. And then I wanted from 10 to 12 to be the time when I'm planning my practice program for that afternoon. That was the most important part of the day for me. And I would ask that I'd want no interruptions at all. If any calls from my family or somebody under whose supervision, if they want to do that, be all right. But otherwise, I didn't want any visiting calls. And a couple of hours planning the practice, and then in the afternoon, come back and try to catch up on the mail and phone calls that needed, and then be over and be dressed and on the floor by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because our practices after we got Pauley Pavilion, which I had my last 17 years, would be, no, I didn't have 17 years, I only had 10 years. I wanted to be on time. I expect my players to be on time, and as Andy and Sven will tell you, that's one of the things that I was very strict about, be on time. I thought practice should start on time, and it must stop on time. And I think they'll tell you that I didn't keep them late. We stopped on time, and I didn't always do that. You know, in my early years of teaching, practice wasn't going well, and you know it's going to be that way a lot of times. And practice wasn't going, I'll keep them late, and I'll work them harder and keep them late. And they're tired mentally, and they're not going to get things. And I one time I gave new things late in the practice. And that's crazy. That's when they're tired physically, so they're tired mentally, and they wouldn't get it. And as they wouldn't get that, more and more I get upset, and I'd keep them longer. And I was newly married then. You know, it's my early years. And a newly married man should never go home, you know, in a bad mood. When you get older, it doesn't make any difference. You know, early. But I wanted to be at practice early, and my players could come into practice at 3. I wanted them there on the floor, certainly no later than 3:15, to be able to loosen up a little bit on themselves before I blew the whistle at 3:29. We're going to start our practice, our organized practice, at 3:30. But I wanted to have some little time between 3 and 3:50. There were certain individuals that I might ask to come a little early. I wanted to work on them on some particular aspect for a little while. After practice, during the season, we did have, in my last number of years, we'd have training table, and we'd have that. Then I'd go home, and that's where your joy comes, to finally getting home and being with your family. Because, as has been said, family, faith, and friends. And if you have that, you don't need much else, really. But that would be my pretty schedule. And then that night, I'd do a little reading. I tried not to bring my practices home. And I'm very proud. My dear Nellie would say, when she was interviewed, she'd say, I can never tell whether John had a good practice or bad practice, because he would be the same when he came home. And I think that's important. I think there are those who bring the day home to their wife, and they've had some problems too. Maybe the children have acted up a little in some way. They got a report from school or something that need this or that. And I think if you bring your problems home, it isn't good. And try to make that the real family time when you are at home. Now, out of season, then that would be entirely different. I didn't have those 2 hours to plan the practice, and I didn't have the practice, and try to get home and discipline my daughter over here, who was always getting in some sort of trouble, and I don't know, or trying to get her little brother in trouble in some way. Of course, she wouldn't believe that, but I kept a pretty good routine. But I really, I didn't go off. I think family should come first. And Nellie was, if I had to go somewhere, she went with me, and she was at every game, and road or at home. And I think you have to keep the family well up there. Don't get so involved in making a life you forget to make a living, or making a living that you forget to make a life. I reversed that a little bit. You got to make a life. Mm-hmm.
Coach, you walked us through your day. Could you take us back to when Lou Alcindor and Warren and Gail Goodridge would be out ready to go, and you were ready to go? How did you get those players motivated to work together and come up with a plan?
They all have the same thing. They all want to play, and they all want to outscore their opponents. Whatever you call them. You call it winning, fine. They all want that, and it's no problem. And I was very fortunate, I would say, in my years. I hoped I had a little something to do with it by the recruiting, but not always. Individuals that will be team-oriented and will be thinking of the interests and the welfare of the team as a whole rather than the individual. And that certainly was true. The two probably most recognized players that I ever had at UCLA, and I think probably those who followed basketball will agree, were Alcindor and Walton. And you never saw two more team-oriented players than those two. Now, I had others just as good, but they weren't in the limelight, the spotlight like they were. You didn't find a better one, these two over here, as far as their work is concerned. In my opinion, at the time, I had better players that played ahead of them. But they had that type of attitude, and many others. But they'd be the two that you would point out. They were very unselfish. They never a problem. Walton, when practice was over, I may have to bail him out of jail in one way or another. I couldn't do it personally because that was against the rules, but I didn't want him to stay in if he got in there. But he was, anti-establishment. He lay down on Wilshire Boulevard and stopped traffic for miles. So somebody else always egging him into it. He wasn't a leader in that, but the smart guys, they were on the side. You get out there and do this. They take over the administration. There's Bill inside. Take it over. Here's the other guys outside. What's he doing in there? And they're the ones that directed him in there. And but on the practice floor, he was as perfect as anyone you could ever ask for. He was there. He worked hard. He was unselfish. He had great help. And there's quite a story with Swen over here. I recruited Swen, and he'll tell you I was honest with him. I said, you'll never get to play much because you're going to work against a player coming in that I think is going to be one of the all-greats. And but he needs somebody big and strong to work against him. Swen at that time hadn't played a lot. He came from Holland. He hadn't played high school basketball. And an ex-player of mine, Don Johnson, saw him, I think, working in the filling station, got him to come to college. And he came in his first year against Walton. I kind of felt sorry for him at times. But before long, I started to feel sorry for Bill. Swen improved and improved and improved. And I told him at the time he came, if you come here, you'll never get to play very much, but I think you're going to have the opportunity to work on one that I think is going to be one of the greats every day in practice. And if you do that for 3 years, if you have ambitions to play pro basketball, I think you'll have the opportunity because there aren't too many that have your size and the abilities that you have. And I know about your work habits and so on. And he did, and then it's kind of hard to work against someone like Bill every day, and never getting to play too much. But he got better and better and better. And some of you may know that Swen Nader drafted. He was the Rookie of the Year in the ABA, the old pro league. And when it broke up, he went to the NBA and led the league in rebounding one year and had a fine pro career. And here's a fellow that never played very much in college at all. But he had a tremendous attitude. And I think that Bill helped him. He helped Bill. And Mike Warren, I've never seen a smarter basketball player than Mike Warren. I didn't teach him that. He had things you don't teach. Of course, he did play high school ball for a player who played for me at the high school where he played, and he also played for me at Indiana State, and he had a pretty good idea when he came out here what I expected from him, and he was tremendous. And but their desire to do well in those never went down. They wanted to do well, but their desire in doing well is so they could put that to use for the welfare of the team. And if you have that, you have to have the ability. If they don't have the ability, I've had some great team players with great attitudes, but they just didn't have the ability. But I think that they were. I mentioned in my book, They Call Me Coach, two players that gave me great satisfaction. I think came as close to living up to their potential as anyone. And I mentioned them, and you probably don't know their names: Connie Burke and Doug McIntosh. Do either one of those mean anything to any of you? Doug McIntosh might. I doubt if Connie Burke would. Dear Tony passed away in this last year, but he wasn't very quick, and I like quickness. He wasn't a good jumper, and I like him to be able to get up there. But he worked hard. He played smart. He utilized his talents to the best ability. He wasn't quick, but he learned to do things quickly by proper footwork and proper balance, things of that sort. And Doug McIntosh, when I saw him play as a freshman, we had a freshman team, I thought, he'll never play a game, a minute in the varsity until the game is won or lost, then I might throw him in. But he'll never play in a meaningful minute. And you know, the very next year, as a sophomore, we came to the national championship game against a big university who had a big team. Tyson Buckley, 6'10", 6'11", and he's only 6'5", and he replaced the starting center. We had about 8-9 minutes played the rest of the game and did a tremendous job. And just a year before, he'd never played a meaningful. And he was very much responsible for us being able to winning that championship. And there were others that got more publicity because they scored more points, and they're the ones that usually get the publicity, or the flashy ones. And Doug wasn't flashy. Not surprising to me that he has a pastorate in the Atlanta, Georgia area that he's worked hard, small, and it's a big one. And I'm going to get to be with him on Easter Sunday, I think. And I think my daughter and one of my granddaughters will get to see him, Lord willing. But the ones you mentioned, there was no problem. They want to do well. They want to do well. You don't have to force them. And but they're all wonderful with whom to work.
Hi, Coach. Watching the Olympics, and especially the ice skaters, they're committed to excellence, and they get out there and they want to do well, and then seeing someone fall, and then how they get up graciously and continue the program. And I'm wondering, what is it you do to coach, counsel, train, to influence someone to have that type of character and fortitude and strength to continue on once there's a failure? They want to win, and yet to accept that defeat.
Well, there's a lot of truth in the statement that I'm sure you've all heard. It's no disgrace to fall down, but it's a disgrace to stay there. You've got to keep coming back. We're all imperfect. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fail. We can't quit because we make a mistake. Now, in something like you're speaking, a fall in the ice rink or something like that, that's it. You're going to lose, but you don't give up. You may lose the championship, but you never lose in your heart if you know that you made the effort and do the best you're capable of doing. You made the effort. You're never going to do it, but you can always make the effort to do that. And I never want players to fear failure. Now there are those who teach, but they want them afraid to fail. I don't want them afraid to fail. I don't want to feel that way. I know they're imperfect. They are going to fail on occasions, but that's to be positive. Let's look for the positive end of it all the time. And I that's what I tried to do. I wanted to be positive all the time. I don't expect them to win all the time. I don't expect them to make every shot in various things. I didn't want to be critical of sins of commission. I would be critical of those of omission, where they're not thinking, not doing the things they should. But the commission, the doer makes mistakes. There's a chapter in Andy's book that says the team that makes the most mistakes will probably win. Well, you got to take it with a little grain of salt, but what it is my college coach taught me that the doer makes mistakes. If you don't do anything, well, that's the biggest mistake of all, really, but you don't make mistakes. If man never shoots, never missed a shot because he didn't take any. And I didn't want him to be afraid of failure. I want him to understand that on occasions they were going to fail. But just even take examples. I mentioned shooting. Don't force shots up there. Now, you see him forcing things in there. I didn't like that. It must come within the framework of the overall philosophy that we have.
Coach, have you ever considered putting together a pyramid of failure? And if so, what would you put at the heart there where you have skill on the pyramid of success?
I just put hard, I guess. It'd be pretty good to put right in there. I don't know. I've never done that. I don't know. But many of the blocks, you take one out and the things won't crumple. You got to have them all. I think they're all important. I don't care what your ability is if you're not industrious and work hard. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, you're not going to do the best you can. So all are important. If you're not friendly with others, you're not going to have the team concept. If you're not loyal to somebody, you're not going to have peace with yourself. If you're not cooperative, you know. So all are important. I wouldn't want to take anyone out. I could change the name on some to something else, but it would mean roughly the same thing as what I have in there. And as far as the ones of failure, I really believe of those that have ability, let's say of equal ability, those that don't do as well will be the ones that don't make the effort to do as well. They expect too much. I wouldn't know how else to sort of answer that. I don't like to look at it from the failure. Let's look at it from the positive. Let's do these things. Do the positive things to accomplish things. Eliminate the negative. What is there a song? Someone goes that? Accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. Shall I sing that for you? You get so into.
Coach, is there any one thing that you would advise those of us that try to help children as they enter sports? Anything? I find sometimes their attention span isn't everything we'd like. So is there any single thing that you would try to instill in children as they enter sports or any endeavor as they're trying to improve themselves?
Well, I think, first of all, you got to listen to them. I think too often, because I said so, or something, you don't listen to them. And that's not a good way. Listen to them. I think you should expose them to different things. And then let them make their choice. Don't do this because this is what I want you to, or this is what I did. I think there are parents who try to vicariously live through their children doing things that they want them to do, not necessarily the youngster would want to do. I had a dear friend some years ago, a very, very, very wonderful surgeon, and very, very sons that were very, very, very bright and all did well. And I think he had 4 sons, and the first 2 they went into medicine, and the third one went into medicine. I had these sons all in my basketball camps, and one, the youngest, he just came. He didn't want to do that, and but he didn't want to disappoint his parents. He thought. So I knew his parents, and I said, I don't expect that. And I talked with him, and let me talk with them again too, and so. I did, and he didn't enter that profession, and he's been eminently successful in something else. But he felt that his parents wanted him to do that. Well, did they make him feel that way? Perhaps subconsciously, just because the brothers. And he was the youngest, and the one above him had been exceptional as an exceptional athlete too, and he felt he was being compared with his brother, and he had to try to outshine his brother. And I just talk with him. Don't try to outshine your brother or anybody else. Just try to be the best you can be. And I know your parents. They'll be very happy with you because you're a wonderful young man, and he was. And so I say encourage them in the things that they want. You have to give them direction, of course. Well, when they find something that you definitely approve of and think is good, and there are a lot of things. Maybe it's... Andy has a son that's a musician, and I'm sure that's great. What if he had wanted to be a basketball player? That'd been all right too, if that's what he wanted to do. But don't force him to be something that you want him to do. They may want to, and that's fine.
Coach, you touched on an earlier discipline of children, and coming from a father with a 6-year-old girl, 3-year-old boy, and just close to a 1-year-old little boy. I'd like to hear your thoughts, and if you had a choice to do it over again, raising your kids and great-grandkids.
Love them. Love them. That's the most powerful word in our language. Love them. And, but you must listen to them, as I just mentioned, as well as having them listen to you. But and don't make threats. Don't say things. If you do this, we're going to do that. If you do it. But don't threaten them. I believe they have to learn. And I've said the most important profession in the world is parenting. And certainly in those early years, as you're on now, that's the most important. I think that'll have more influence on them later than any other one single thing. You won't realize it, and they won't realize it, but I think it really does. In the earlier years is where they need the most. But I think listen to them and gently explain to them certain things where, no, this isn't proper, and then direct them to something that would be more proper. But you have to do it gently, I believe. You don't get anywhere yelling and screaming at them, and you do it with love.
Coach, I've got a question. I'm looking at the pyramid of success, and how do you translate the pyramid of success with its friendship, loyalty, cooperation, enthusiasm, industriousness to the juvenile gangs of East LA and South Central? A lot of those characteristics, loyalty, friendship, cooperation, are why young men, black, brown, join those juvenile gangs. Unfortunately, you just mentioned parenting. Those parenting skills are not evident in those communities. They didn't grow up with a Joshua Wood did. They don't have those value structures. How does this pyramid of success translate to those communities?
Well, that's very difficult.
I know it's a very difficult question.
Yeah,
and I'm
it's
not
like-
trying to be unfair about it, but this is a great pyramid of success, and that is a real problem for our community. And have you given any thought on how this pyramid of success could translate and possibly bring success to those communities?
I wish I could. I wish I could. We need it before they become that way. That's the most important, and the prevention. If you have the prevention, you won't have the cure. Most of those, as your youngster, many of them, as we know, come from inner city homes, and many of them don't have good parental guidance at home. And I think we need a greater effort to help that. The prevention is more, I can't say it's more important, but if we have the prevention, we won't have to have the cure so much. And once that they reach that age, I don't know. You know, far more intelligent people than I are trying to cope with this gang situation, and they have loyalty to each other. That is right, and that causes part of the problems. You become a lot, pretty much like those with whom you associate, and they haven't had it at home, and they're getting it out, and they're getting some attention, something we all need and love, and it's just a hard thing. I certainly wish I had an answer to that. Oh, I'd be something if I had an answer to that. They'd look on me like Mother Teresa.
Coach?
It shows how difficult the problem is, because a pyramid of success really isn't available.
Yes?
Because they don't have that foundation to build on. Thank you.
But breaking the old habits, tough.
Coach? Okay. I have a question about faith. It seems to me, looking at the pyramid, it's pretty difficult to accomplish these things without it. And just speaking for myself, I speak to God every night. It's easy to tell when that happens, but it's more difficult to tell when He's speaking to us. And so my question is, how do we know when God is speaking to us? And when that does happen, how do we better listen to Him?
He's always speaking to you. You're not always listening, but He's always speaking. You have to have faith that is true. If you don't have it, if you don't believe in it, I'm sorry for you. When Socrates, I don't believe I mentioned that today, did I? When Socrates was jailed and facing imminent unjust death, he had great serenity, great peace. The jailers couldn't understand that. They couldn't understand why. Here's a man, he knows he's facing unjust and imminent death, and yet he's at peace, has great serenity. They say, why aren't you preparing for death? And Socrates' answer was, I've been preparing for death all my life by the life I've led. He knows. He knows. He listens.
Ladies and gentlemen, Coach John Wooden.
Thank you.